Werewolves, creatures of the night, hunters of the week, or just a movie character with great abs while shirtless. Regardless, it might be a full moon tonight. So if it is, be careful of that howling sound coming from the distance. Just to be safe, I suggest you get cozy and comfortable. Stay inside. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and get ready for 3 true werewolf encounter stories. Creature in the woods. This happened to me and my friends in 1988. But we were actually just talking about it again the other day, and I thought I'd share it to see if anyone has thought as to what it could have been. To give some background information, this story involves myself, my boyfriend Andy, his cousin Mark, and his girlfriend Tracy. It was a Saturday night, and we were doing our usual weekend thing of riding quads up in the mountains behind Andy's house. His family owned several hundred acres, so we were on his property, and this is property that has been in his family for as far back as the early 1900s. The property had 4 houses on it and a huge garage. All of our families were down at the main house just hanging out and playing cards. As I stated, this was the norm for us on the weekends. This particular weekend, my quad was not running very well, and since we didn't want to deal with it breaking down while we were up on the trails, I just rode with Andy. We had been riding for about an hour and decided to stop and take a break. We had a little place we had kind of set up off the trail with logs so that we'd just sit and hang out. That night was a full moon, so we really had no need for any lights. We could pretty much see everything. It was beautiful, so we were sitting there talking about stuff and laughing and joking when all of a sudden, Tracy just got the most terrified look on her face. She was just looking straight behind me, and she began to shake, and she had tears streaming down her face. I stood up and walked over to her and asked her what was wrong, and she was literally frozen in fear. I turned and looked in the direction that she was looking at, and that was when I saw it. I stood straight up and kind of stood in front of Tracy. I grabbed Andy and told him to look at the top of the tree line, and he grabbed Mark. I wanted to make sure that we all saw was what Tracy was looking at. I'm gonna describe what we saw in the best way I can. It had a big husky body like a bear, but its head looked like something you would see on a caveman. It was on all 4s, and its legs looked like horse legs. Nothing on this thing looked like it belonged on it. It was like it was morphed into all different kinds of things. Its eyes were blue, like what would you see on a flame. Needless to say, we were scared. This thing was starting to growl at us and slowly stepped forward. We started backing up. I told Tracy not to run, but to just start her way back to her quad and put it in neutral and start backing it up. We got her going, and she was making her way down the trail to the spot where she could just coast down the trail when this thing suddenly lunged at us. We got on our quads, and Andy grabbed his rifle and fired a warning shot at it, and also to get the attention of the adults down at the house. That was our way of letting them know that there was a problem, since there were no cell phones at the time. So as we were making our way down the trail, Andy was walking backwards and keeping an eye out on this thing because it was behind us, kind of stalking us. You could see it because of its eyes. We were about halfway down when his dad and uncle reached us, and Tracy basically collapsed at their feet. They thought something was medically wrong with her, and that was when Mark told them to look down the trail and look for the blue flaming eyes. His uncle spotted it and turned his spotlight on it. We were stunned, to say the least. This thing had no hair and it looked as though it was inside out or something. It was the nastiest thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, not to upset anyone, but they did start shooting at it. They thought they had hit it, but we weren't able to find any tracks of blood or any tracks at all for that matter. We went back down to the house for the rest of the night, and the next morning we all gathered and went up looking for anything that would lead us to what this thing was or where it came from. We could find no trace of anything, and we never saw it again. Tracy never went back out with us because she was completely terrified. I've always kind of been fascinated with things that may be paranormal. The whole time I was looking at this thing, the only thought that kept going through my mind was it was some kind of demon, goblin, whatever word you want to give it. So we continued going out regularly and was just a little more mindful of our surroundings, but never saw it again. Sorry if this was long, but I knew that details were going to be needed. Attacked by wolf. After 20 years of remembering this event, as if it happened yesterday, I decided to share my story in hopes of gaining some insight as to what it may mean, or if it was just a malevolent attack by some sort of spirit or energy. I was 3 years old at the time. At the time, my family lived in a trailer, which burned down the year after this event. I was sleeping in my twin-size bed, in my bedroom, which may have been around 8 feet from door to far wall, and 5 to 6 feet from wall to wall. Up until this point in time, I had slept on my back. One evening, while I was sleeping, I awoke suddenly for no reason. This is the moment that changed my life. Upon waking up, I looked to the wall, which was flush with the foot of my bed, as it's where my head was facing from sleeping on my back. In a flash, I saw it. It was a large timber wolf with the most vicious snarl one could imagine on its face. Somehow the beast had jumped directly through my wall and onto my bed. Scared out of my mind, I ran. The wolf gave chase. I ran to the couch into my living room, which was the tallest and highest point in the house I could reach. I tiptoed on the back of the couch, but the wolf was figuring a way up himself. Seeing this, I ran to the dining room table, one room away. I hurried up and barricaded myself under the table with the chairs. Looking back at the experience, logically one would assume that the wolf who traveled through a wall would be able to transfer itself through the chairs. This was not the case. I held onto one of the chairs for dear life while the wolf kept tossing it about trying to get to me. The moment that this went on seemed like an eternity. The wolf was again gaining ground, and I knew I had to try something different. The only other choice available to me was to try to outrun the wolf and make it to my parents' bedroom at the end of the hall on the other side of the trailer. I pushed the chair out at the wolf and he backed off for a moment. I ran down the hall as fast as I could, screaming bloody murder, hoping that my mother would wake. The wolf chased me down the hallway on my run. I was banging on the door of the bedroom, screaming. I could feel the presence of the wolf right behind me, but as soon as the knob of the door turned, I heard my mother say, "What's wrong?" The wolf was gone. To this day, I've never witnessed anything as horrifying as I did that night. The other night, while I was walking my dog, I heard a howl outside. Knowing that the neighbors' dogs don't howl, I was spooked a bit and went right back inside. Finally, gathering up the courage to tell the story to those outside of my comfort zone, I'd really like to know if anyone has any insight as to what my experience could mean, why it happened, what it was exactly, can it happen again, does it symbolize anything? Thank you in advance for any help and insight you're able to give in means of the comments. Thank you. The dog thing. Since about April of 2010, my family has been plagued by an entity that my brother and I call the dog thing. We have no idea what it is or why it suddenly showed up. Only my brother and I, who are both mediums, have seen it. Our mom, who has some minor sensitive abilities, has felt it, but has never actually seen the apparition. Our dad, who has no abilities, hasn't. Like I said before, this thing has been hanging around us since the early part of this year. It simply just showed up one day and hasn't left yet. My brother John was the first to tell me that a new entity was in the house. He was home alone after one day at school playing computer games when he noticed a black figure standing in the hallway. It was about 6.5 feet tall, but most surprisingly, it looked like a dog that stood on 2 feet. It had glowing yellow eyes, huge ears, and a long snout. From the collarbone down to the waist, it had the upper body of a muscular man. But from the waist to the feet, it looked like a dog. This entity just stood and looked at John for a long time, then turned and walked through the wall into my room. Needless to say, John was terrified. From that point on, it was obvious that the energy in our bedrooms had shifted dramatically. John was suddenly afraid to be in the house alone, as it made him feel as though someone was watching him, waiting to strike. The vibe in my room also changed. The air within seemed to be made of a lead that pushed on me and weighed me down and made me feel really, really tired. I could go to bed and get 12 hours of sleep, but when I'd wake up in the morning, I would feel exhausted. For a while, John confided in me all the times he was seeing the entity in his room, in the hallway, in the living room, in the kitchen, wherever he was, whenever he was alone, it would appear. I knew he wasn't making this up because he was terrified to be alone or even sleep in his own room. One day, I had finally had my encounter with the dog thing. I was alone in the house, putting on makeup, when I got the sudden urge to look outside the door into the hallway. I was just in time to see a black, wolf-like dog trot past me and vanish into my brother's room. Initially, I wasn't spooked. At this time, my childhood dog, a German Shepherd, was due to pass away soon. He wasn't sick or anything, he was just old and it was his time to go. I just assumed his soul was just projecting. However, I did notice that the color of the dog didn't match up with a projecting spirit. When people or animals are close to death, their aura and souls turn white. This apparition was black, a smoky black. John told me that this was the dog thing he was talking about. It wasn't until a month or so later that I saw the dog thing again. This time it was standing in the middle of my brother's room. It noticed me and went into typical animal defense mode. Its ears flattened down on its head. It bent down in a defensive position. The hackles on its neck raised, and it growled fiercely at me, showing long, curved canine teeth. I just stood there and it vanished into smoke. The last time I encountered this entity was in early September. I was alone in the house cleaning my room when I was hit all of a sudden by a powerful energy. I felt it. It was here in the house. It was in my brother's room, 15 feet away, spinning out negative energy like no tomorrow. I felt sick, my stomach hurt, my legs felt weak, and all of my energy seemed to have been drained away. My thoughts were now slower, and it hurt to think. I staggered to my brother's room and stood there with as much resolve as I could muster at that point. I ordered the entity to leave. Its energy was toxic, and its presence no longer welcome. Then there was peace. I felt much better, if drained of energy. It wasn't there anymore, and it hasn't been here since. However, I don't think it'll be gone for a very long time. This thing has a habit of popping in and out whenever it so chooses. I don't know what it is or why it's here, and I need help.